At dinner, my husband looked across the table at me and said, "From now on, you sleep in the garage," and the strangest part was not his voice, or the way my son stared down at his plate, or the little smile my daughter-in-law tried to hide behind her wineglass. The strangest part was how calm I felt when I answered, "Okay. My name is Margaret Whitaker." I was 68 years old that Sunday evening, standing in the dining room of the same Columbus, Ohio house where I had spent 42 years folding laundry, packing school lunches, paying bills, hosting Christmas mornings, and pretending not to notice when love slowly turned into tolerance. I had spent most of that afternoon cooking the kind of dinner Harold used to praise when we were younger: pot roast slow-cooked until it fell apart with a fork, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans with toasted almonds, warm rolls wrapped in a blue cotton towel, and an apple pie cooling on the counter. The house smelled like everything I had once believed family meant: warmth, effort, forgiveness. A place at the table. Harold sat at the head of that table like a judge who had already signed the sentence. At 72, he had become heavier in the shoulders and thinner in patience, his gray hair combed back too sharply, his wedding ring still on his finger but worn like an old habit rather than a promise. Our son Brian sat to his right, 41 years old, broad-faced and tired, turning his fork over and over without eating much. Beside him sat Kelsey, my daughter-in-law, polished as always in a cream sweater and gold earrings, her blonde hair falling perfectly over one shoulder, her eyes moving around the room as if she were measuring curtains for a house she did not own yet. I had noticed that look before. I had ignored it before. That was one of the many things I would later regret. The argument had started over something small, the way cruel things often do. I asked Harold if he had called the plumber about the upstairs bathroom, because the sink had been dripping for 3 days. He did not answer right away. He set down his fork, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at me with a coldness that made the room seem suddenly wider. "You always have something to complain about, don't you?" he said. I glanced at Brian, waiting for the small laugh he used to give when his father was being unreasonable, the kind that meant, "Dad, come on." But Brian did not laugh. He looked at his plate. Kelsey lifted her glass and took a slow sip. "I wasn't complaining," I said quietly. "I was just asking." Harold leaned back in his chair. "No, Margaret. You were reminding everyone that this house revolves around you. Your problems. Your comfort. Your little routines." The words fell onto the table one by one, spoiling the meal I had made with my own hands. "Maybe," Kelsey said softly, "what Harold means is that everyone needs space." She said everyone, but her eyes were on me. Brian cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe it would help if you and Dad had some separation for a while. Just inside the house, I mean." I stared at my son then. The boy who once came running to my side during thunderstorms. The boy whose fever I checked with the back of my hand. The boy I had driven across 3 states for college because he was scared to fly alone. He was a man now, and still he could not look at me when it mattered. "Separation?" I repeated. Harold's palm hit the table hard enough to make the silverware jump, not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to remind us who wanted control of the room. "From now on, you sleep in the garage," he said. "Maybe then you'll remember this isn't your little kingdom." For a moment, no one moved. The pot roast sat untouched between us. The clock above the china cabinet ticked with ridiculous politeness. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the soft rush of the furnace through the vents, the tiny sound of Kelsey's fingernail tapping once against her glass. Harold expected tears. Brian expected pleading. Kelsey expected humiliation. I gave them none of it. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved before he became a stranger with my last name, and I said, "Okay." Kelsey blinked. Just once. It was small, but I saw it. Harold's mouth tightened, as if my quiet answer had bothered him more than an argument would have. Brian finally looked up, but only for a second. I stood, pushed in my chair, and walked to the kitchen. I did not take my plate. I did not clear the table. I did not cut the pie. My hands were steady as I took my old navy coat from the hook by the back door and opened the door to the garage. The air inside was cold and smelled of cardboard, motor oil, dust, and cedar from a broken chest Harold had promised to repair 10 years ago. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling, throwing pale light over stacked boxes, garden tools, paint cans, and old Christmas decorations. Behind me, through the door, I heard Harold mutter something about peace at last. Kelsey laughed softly. Brian said nothing. That silence followed me into the garage more sharply than any insult. I stood there for a long moment, not crying, not shaking, not even feeling the cold yet. Then my eyes drifted to the shelves along the far wall, to the row of storage boxes Harold had not touched in years. And there, behind a cracked toolbox and a bundle of extension cords, I saw the corner of a blue metal box I had almost forgotten. My mother's box. The one she gave me before she died. The one Harold never cared enough to open. I walked toward it slowly. My fingers brushed dust from the lid. And as I lifted it down, something inside me shifted into place. Harold thought he had sent me to the garage to make me feel small. He had no idea he had sent me straight to the one thing he should have prayed I never found. I carried the blue metal box to the old workbench under the garage window and set it down as carefully as if it were alive. The metal was colder than I expected, and the little brass latch resisted my fingers for a moment before giving way with a tired click. For years, I had believed that box held nothing but old memories, the kind a woman keeps because throwing them away feels like betraying herself. Birthday cards from my mother. A few faded photographs. Receipts from a life no one else would care to remember. But that night, with the house warm behind me and my own family pretending I had become furniture they could move wherever they pleased, that box felt less like storage and more like a witness. I opened the lid and found the lavender envelope first. My mother had loved lavender, dried it in little cloth sachets, tucked it into dresser drawers, and said every woman should keep something soft in a world that was always trying to make her hard. The envelope had my name written across the front in her slanted handwriting, Margaret Ann. I sat on the wooden stool Harold used to use when he changed oil in the lawnmower, and for a few seconds I could not open it. Not because I was afraid of the paper. Because I was afraid of hearing my mother's voice in a place where my husband had just tried to make me feel unwanted. Finally, I slipped the letter free. The paper had yellowed around the edges, but the words were clear. She had written it shortly before she passed, back when Harold and I were still paying off this house, back when Brian was in high school, back when I still believed sacrifice always came back as gratitude. My mother wrote that she was proud of me, but that pride did not mean trust should be blind. She wrote that love was holy only when it was mutual. Then came the sentence that made my breath stop in my chest: never let a man make you feel homeless in a house your money helped build. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower. The words seemed to fill the garage until the cold did not feel quite so sharp. Beneath the letter were documents I had forgotten I kept. A bank statement from the account that held my inheritance after my mother sold her little ranch house outside Dayton. A cashier's check made out for the down payment on this very home. A handwritten note from Harold thanking me for believing in him when the bank would not. A folder from Whitaker Construction, the company Harold loved to describe as something he built from nothing, even though the first office deposit, the first insurance payment, and the first 3 months of payroll had come from the money my mother left me. I touched each page slowly. Not with anger. Not yet. With recognition. The way you might touch your own face after years of letting other people tell you what you looked like. A gust of winter air slipped under the garage door, and I pulled my coat tighter around me. I could hear muffled voices through the wall that separated the garage from the kitchen. Harold's voice came first, lower now, satisfied. Kelsey's followed, smoother, almost cheerful. Brian said something I could not make out. They were still sitting at my table, eating my food, letting the apple pie I had baked grow cold while deciding what to do with the woman who made it. I looked around the garage. There was the red sled Brian used when he was 8. The camping chairs from trips Harold stopped wanting to take. Boxes labeled Christmas, taxes, linens, Brian's school years. My entire life had been pushed into corners, stacked neatly, saved for later, and then forgotten. Maybe that was what hurt most. Not the garage itself. The familiarity of it. I had been living in emotional storage for years without admitting it. Harold had moved me there long before he said the words out loud. He had stopped asking my opinion. Brian had stopped calling just to talk. Kelsey had started walking through my kitchen opening cabinets as if taking inventory. And I had smiled through all of it, because women my age are taught that keeping peace is the same thing as being loved. I folded my mother's letter and placed it on top of the documents. Then I searched deeper. Property tax receipts. Old mortgage records. Copies of checks with my signature. A sealed folder from Samuel Reed, the attorney who handled paperwork when my mother's estate settled. I had not spoken to Samuel in years, but I remembered his calm voice, his gray suits, the way he once told me to keep copies of everything. At the time, I thought he was just being careful. Sitting there under that bare garage bulb, I understood he had been giving me a lifeline. The cold began to reach my feet through my shoes, but I did not move toward the blanket Harold had thrown onto a folding chair as if that made his cruelty practical. Instead, I took out my phone and photographed every document, one by one. The down payment. The bank transfers. The company records. My mother's letter. My hands stayed steady. That surprised me. Grief had made them tremble before. Humiliation had not. Humiliation, I was learning, could become something cleaner if you let it cool long enough. Sometime after midnight, the kitchen light went off. Footsteps moved above me. A door closed. Then another. The house settled into silence. No one came to check on me. No one asked if I was warm enough. No one opened the door and said they had gone too far. I sat alone in the garage beside the blue metal box, surrounded by proof that I had not imagined my own life. Harold had wanted me to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. But the papers in front of me told a different story. I was not a burden in that house. I was part of its foundation. And foundations do not beg the walls for permission to exist. By morning, the garage had changed shape in my mind. It was still cold. It still smelled faintly of dust, gasoline, and cardboard softened by years of Ohio winters. My back ached from sitting too long on the wooden stool, and my coffee, reheated in an old travel mug I found near the toolbox, tasted bitter and metallic. But I was no longer sitting there as a woman who had been sent away. I was sitting there as a woman who had started paying attention. Around 6:30, I heard movement inside the house. The soft thud of cabinet doors. Water running in the kitchen sink. Kelsey's voice came first, bright and gentle in that practiced way of hers, the voice she used at church fundraisers and neighborhood barbecues when she wanted people to think she had a generous heart. "Harold, she really stayed out there all night?" Harold answered with a low sound that might have been a laugh. "Maybe now she will understand boundaries." I looked at the blue metal box open on the workbench, my mother's letter resting on top of the documents. Boundaries. That was a word people used when they wanted cruelty to sound healthy. A few minutes later, the door from the kitchen opened, and warm air spilled into the garage. Kelsey stepped in wearing cream-colored slippers, black leggings, and one of those oversized sweaters that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to win. Brian was little. She held a mug of coffee in one hand and an old plaid blanket in the other, folded across her arm like she was visiting someone in a hospital room. Her eyes moved quickly over the workbench, but I had already closed the box and slipped it beneath an old tarp. I had learned something during 42 years of marriage: never let someone see what you are protecting until you are ready for them to fear it. Margaret, she said softly, I brought you coffee. She set the mug on a shelf beside a can of paint thinner, not close enough for me to take without standing. That was kind of you, I said. My voice sounded rough from the cold, but steady. Kelsey tilted her head, studying me. She expected tears, red eyes, maybe an apology. She did not know what to do with calm. Listen, she said, lowering her voice as if she and I were sharing something tender. Last night was difficult for everyone. Harold was upset. Brian is under a lot of pressure. I think what matters now is that we make this transition as peaceful as possible. I looked at her hands. Perfect nails. Pale pink polish. A wedding ring she twisted when she was pretending to be concerned. Transition? I asked. A small pause. Not long enough for most people to notice. Long enough for a woman who had spent decades reading silence. I just mean, she continued, things are changing. Harold needs a calmer environment. Brian and I want what is best for the whole family. And you deserve a place where people can help you with day-to-day things. I smiled faintly. Day-to-day things like sleeping indoors? Her expression tightened, then softened again so quickly it was almost impressive. You know that is not what I meant. Do I? She glanced toward the kitchen door. Margaret, if you cooperate, this can stay peaceful. There it was. Not concern. Not kindness. Cooperation. The word sat between us colder than the concrete floor. Cooperate with what, exactly? I asked. Kelsey pressed her lips together. For the first time, she looked less polished. You should talk to Harold. He has some papers he wants to go over with you. Nothing dramatic. Just practical arrangements. Papers about what? The house. Finances. Long-term planning. She said it the way people say weather, casual and unavoidable. Then she gave me the blanket, or rather placed it over the back of a folding chair, as if handing it directly to me would make her responsible for my condition. I know this feels uncomfortable now, but later you might see that it was necessary. She left before I could answer. The kitchen door closed, and I sat very still. Necessary. Peaceful. Transition. Long-term planning. Those were not words born overnight from one angry dinner. Those were rehearsed words. Packaged words. Words from conversations I had not been invited to. I waited until I heard her footsteps move away. Then I stood quietly, crossed the garage, and opened the kitchen door just enough for sound to pass through. I am not proud of listening from behind a door. But I had been honest for 42 years, and honesty had earned me a blanket in the garage. Sometimes dignity means knowing when to gather the truth. Kelsey was speaking in the breakfast nook. She is calmer than I expected, she said. Harold grunted. She always acts noble. Give it 2 days. Brian's voice came next, low and uneasy. Maybe we should slow down. My heart moved toward him before my mind could stop it. Even after everything, some part of a mother still reaches for the child inside the grown man. But Kelsey answered before Harold could. No, Brian. This is exactly why we cannot slow down. Your father finally understands what needs to happen. If we wait, your mother will start calling people, making things emotional, confusing everything. She is my mother, Brian said. It was not a defense. It was almost a reminder to himself. Kelsey sighed. And we are trying to protect her. A facility with staff would be safer than this big house. You know that. Once Harold signs the transfer, we can renovate, sell if we need to, and make sure she is settled somewhere appropriate. The word facility landed in me like winter water. Not a smaller bedroom. Not a cooling off period. Not even a separation inside the house. They were planning to remove me completely. Harold said, "The lawyer said the paperwork should be simple if she signs." "Willingly." Kelsey replied, "Then make her want to sign. She cannot stay in that garage forever." I closed the door so slowly the latch barely made a sound. For a moment, I stood with my hand still on the knob, looking at the place where I had hung Brian's snow boots when he was a boy. I remembered kneeling there, tugging wet laces loose while he told me about school, his cheeks red from the cold, his whole world small enough to fit in my arms. Now he sat 15 feet away while his wife discussed putting me somewhere appropriate. I returned to the workbench and pulled out a small spiral notebook from my purse. It was the one I usually used for grocery lists, birthday reminders, and measurements for curtains. On the first clean page, I wrote the date. Then the time. Then every word I could remember. Transition. Cooperate. Facility. Transfer. Sign willingly. My handwriting looked neat, almost ordinary. That comforted me. They had mistaken my quiet for weakness. They had mistaken my age for confusion. They had mistaken my love for permission. I closed the notebook, placed it beside my mother's letter, and rested both hands on the blue metal box. Last night, Harold had humiliated me. This morning, Kelsey had educated me. They were not trying to make me uncomfortable. They were trying to make me disappear. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. That afternoon, while the rest of the house moved around me as if I had already become a problem to be solved, I began remembering Brian in pieces. Not the man sitting at the breakfast nook while his wife discussed facilities and transfers, but the child he had been before other people taught him that silence could protect him. I remembered him at 6 years old, standing in this same garage with a baseball glove too big for his hand, begging Harold to play catch after work. Harold had said he was tired. I had seen Brian's face fall, so I had put down the laundry basket, stepped into the driveway, and spent an hour tossing that ball until my shoulder ached. I remembered him at 11, sick with the flu during a February storm, when the roads were slick with ice and every pharmacy seemed closed. I drove nearly 8 miles to find the medicine he needed because Harold had said the weather was too bad. I remembered him at 17, sitting at the kitchen table with college acceptance letters spread out in front of him, terrified of choosing wrong. Harold told him to stop acting helpless. I sat beside him until 2 in the morning, comparing tuition, dorm costs, meal plans, and scholarship forms, telling him that a person did not have to know his whole life at once. That was the boy I had raised. That was the boy I kept looking for every time Brian lowered his eyes instead of defending me. Memory is a strange thing. It does not arrive in order. It comes like sunlight through blinds, one stripe at a time, showing you what you missed because you were too busy surviving the room you were standing in. I sat in the garage with my notebook open and began writing more than what I had heard that morning. I wrote down the first time Brian stopped calling every Sunday. It was shortly after he married Kelsey. She had said weekends were their sacred couple time, which sounded reasonable enough. Then holidays changed. Thanksgiving at my house became Thanksgiving at Kelsey's parents' lake place. Christmas morning became too hectic for visitors. Mother's Day became a quick text with a bouquet delivered by a company that misspelled my name on the card. I had accepted all of it because I did not want to be the kind of mother who clung too tightly. That is the trap many mothers fall into. We mistake being pushed away for giving space. We tell ourselves our children are busy, modern, overwhelmed, building their own lives. We do not want to admit that someone has quietly taught them to see us as an obligation instead of a person. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Kelsey had not taken my place all at once. She had moved into the empty spaces created by my politeness. She corrected my recipes at family dinners. She rearranged my kitchen while pretending to help. She told Brian I was sensitive when I objected, old-fashioned when I asked questions, dramatic when I expressed hurt. She never had to shout. She simply translated me for my own son until he stopped hearing my real voice. And Harold, in his pride, had welcomed it. He liked being admired. Kelsey knew that. She praised his business sense, laughed at his old stories, asked his opinion about investments she had no intention of making without checking someone else first. Harold started sitting straighter when she entered the room. He started calling her practical. Then he started calling me emotional. I had watched it happen in slow motion and kept telling myself that harmony mattered more than pride. But harmony without respect is just surrender with nicer curtains. Near 3 o'clock, the door to the garage opened again. This time it was Brian. He came in wearing his navy jacket, car keys in one hand, phone in the other. He looked uncomfortable, as if the garage were not cold because of the season but because of what it said about him. "Mom," he began, then stopped. I looked up from my notebook. "Yes?" His eyes flicked toward the old tarp covering the blue metal box, then back to me. "Are you all right out here?" It was the kind of question that sounded caring only if you did not think about where he had been all night. "It is 34 degrees outside," I said. "The garage is warmer than that, but not by much." He winced. "Dad is just upset." I closed the notebook slowly. "Your father told his wife of 42 years to sleep next to paint cans and snow shovels." Brian rubbed the back of his neck, the same gesture he had when he was a boy caught breaking curfew. "I know it sounded bad." "It did not sound bad, Brian." "It was bad." He looked away. There it was again, that old escape route. Avoid the eyes, avoid the truth. "Kelsey thinks maybe this could be a reset," he said carefully. "A reset for whom?" "For everyone. You and Dad have been tense. The house is too much. Maybe a smaller place with support would be better." I let the silence sit long enough for him to hear himself. "Did you come here to check on me?" I asked, "or to prepare me?" His face changed then, just slightly. Shame passed over it, but shame is not the same as courage. "I do not want a fight." "No," I said. "You want me to make it easy." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, I saw the child from the driveway, the boy with the oversized glove, still somewhere behind the grown man's tired face. That hurt more than if he had been completely gone. "Brian," I said softly, "when your father spoke to me that way, you heard him." He nodded. "When your wife spoke about moving me into a facility, you heard her." His eyes snapped back to mine. "You heard that?" I heard enough. Color rose in his face. "Mom, it is not like that." "Then explain what it is like." He could not. The space between us filled with every birthday I had planned, every bill I had paid quietly, every fever, every school form, every late-night phone call from college when he needed money or comfort or both. I had given him years of words. Now, when I needed one from him, he had none. He finally whispered, "I am sorry you feel hurt." That sentence finished something in me. Not with noise. Not with bitterness. Just a clean, final click. "I am not hurt because of how I feel," I said. "I am hurt because of what you allowed." He stood there for another second, then nodded like a man leaving a meeting he did not understand. When he went back inside, he did not close the door all the way. Warm air slipped through the crack, thin and useless. I opened my notebook and wrote down what he had said. Then I underlined one sentence twice, "My son knows." Outside the garage window, the late afternoon sky had turned the color of dirty cotton, and a few dry leaves moved across the driveway. I watched them scrape over the concrete, pushed by a wind they could not resist. For years, I had been that leaf, carried by Harold's moods, Brian's avoidance, Kelsey's careful little plans. But that afternoon, sitting beside my mother's box and a notebook full of truth, I stopped confusing movement with helplessness. A leaf can be pushed. A woman with records, memory, and nothing left to lose can choose her direction. After Brian left the garage, I did something I had not done in nearly 10 years. I called Eleanor Price. For a moment, with my thumb hovering over her name, I almost talked myself out of it. Pride is a quiet prison, especially for women my age. We can survive loneliness, disrespect, and fear, but admitting out loud that our own family has turned against us feels like walking into church with our dress torn. Eleanor and I had been close once, back when our boys played Little League together and we took turns bringing orange slices to Saturday games. She had worked for law firms most of her adult life, first as a secretary, then as a paralegal, though she always joked that lawyers got the title and she did the remembering. Life had pulled us apart after she moved to a smaller place near Westerville, but she had sent a Christmas card every year, always with the same neat handwriting and one sentence at the bottom: "Call me before you need me." That morning, sitting in the garage beside my mother's blue metal box, I finally understood what she meant. She answered on the third ring. "Margaret Whittaker," she said, warm but surprised. "Tell me this is not a pocket dial." I tried to laugh, but the sound did not come out right. Eleanor went quiet. "What happened?" There are friends who ask questions because they want details, and there are friends who ask because they are already putting on their coat. Eleanor was the second kind. I told her enough. Not everything. Not the shape of Harold's voice or the way Kelsey smiled or how Brian's apology had felt like a locked door. Just the garage, the papers, the word facility, the planned transfer. When I finished, Eleanor did not gasp or curse or tell me to calm down. She simply said, "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Do not leave those documents unattended. I am coming over." Less than 40 minutes later, I saw her silver Subaru pull into the driveway. She stepped out wearing a dark green wool coat, sensible boots, and the same pearl earrings she had worn since 1989. At 70, Eleanor had the posture of a woman who had spent decades watching powerful men misplace important files and then blaming someone else. She walked up the driveway, glanced at the garage door, and shook her head once. Not dramatically. Just enough. I opened the side door before she knocked. Her eyes moved over my coat, the blanket on the folding chair, the mug of cold coffee, the workbench, the tarp covering the box. "Well," she said, "they certainly saved me the trouble of asking whether they had lost their minds." For the first time since dinner the night before, I nearly smiled. She did not hug me right away. I appreciated that. Sympathy can make a person fall apart before she is ready. Instead, Eleanor took off her gloves and said, "Show me what you found." We sat at the workbench like two girls hiding secrets, except our secrets were property records, bank statements, and proof of a life someone else had been rewriting. I pulled the blue metal box from beneath the tarp and laid everything out in careful stacks. My mother's letter. The cashier's check for the down payment. The old bank statements showing the inheritance transfer. Copies of early payments for Whittaker Construction. A folder from Samuel Reed's office. Eleanor put on her reading glasses and began reviewing each page with the slow patience of a woman who trusted paper more than promises. Outside, a delivery truck passed. Somewhere inside the house, a cabinet closed. I kept expecting Kelsey to appear in the doorway, smiling her careful smile, asking what we were doing. But the garage stayed ours. Cold, cluttered, and suddenly sacred. After several minutes, Eleanor tapped the cashier's check with one finger. "This came from your separate inheritance account." "Yes." "And this was used for the down payment?" "That is what Harold and I agreed at the time." "Was your name on the original purchase documents?" "Yes, but later Harold handled refinancing and business loans." I stopped paying attention. Eleanor looked at me over her glasses. "Many women do." "That is not stupidity, Margaret. That is trust. Unfortunately, trust is not a filing system." She moved to the company documents. Her mouth tightened, but her voice stayed even. "He used your money to start the business." He said it was our future. I am sure he did. She read another page, then another. Finally, she leaned back and took off her glasses. Honey, they did not put you in the garage. I looked at her, confused. Eleanor nodded toward the workbench. They put the evidence next to you. The sentence settled over me with such strange beauty that I had to look away. For almost a full day, I had seen the garage as a punishment. A cold place. A humiliating place. A place my husband chose because he wanted me near the house but beneath it. Eleanor had just turned it into something else. A records room. A witness stand. A place where forgotten truth had been waiting under dust. She picked up the folder from Samuel Reed's office. When did you last speak with him? Years ago. After my mother's estate settled. Is he still practicing? I think so. Then we find out today. She pulled out her phone, searched his name, and within seconds found the office listing in downtown Columbus. Samuel Reed, Estate and Property Law. Same firm, smaller website, older photograph. Eleanor dialed before I could decide whether I was ready. When the receptionist answered, Eleanor's voice changed. It became calm, professional, impossible to brush aside. She explained that Margaret Whitaker needed an urgent consultation regarding marital property, possible coercion, and documents related to a prior inheritance. Hearing those words spoken aloud made my situation sound less like family trouble and more like something with walls around it, something real enough for another adult to take seriously. The receptionist put her on hold. Eleanor covered the phone and looked at me. You are going to feel embarrassed when you tell him. Do it anyway. Shame is how people keep you quiet. I nodded. My throat felt tight. A minute later, Eleanor uncovered the phone. Tomorrow at 10:30, she said. Bring everything. After she ended the call, we sat in silence. Not empty silence. Working silence. Eleanor found a large manila envelope in one of the garage drawers and began placing copies inside. I wrote a list of what I had heard from Kelsey and Harold. She told me to include dates, times, exact phrases, and who was present. Do not decorate the facts, she said. Facts are sharp enough when they are clean. Inside the house, I heard Kelsey laugh at something. The sound floated through the wall, light and careless. Yesterday, that laugh would have made me feel small. Today, it sounded uninformed. Eleanor must have noticed my face because she reached over and touched my wrist. Margaret, listen to me. They may still hurt your feelings. They may still try to pressure you. But they no longer get to control the story alone. I looked down at my mother's letter, at the sentence I had read so many times the night before. Never let a man make you feel homeless in a house your money helped build. Then I looked at Eleanor, sitting beside me in a freezing garage as if it were the most natural place in the world to defend a friend. I thought I had no one, I said. She gave me a look that was almost stern. You had yourself. You just needed a witness. When she left an hour later, the garage was still cold. My situation was still ugly. Harold was still inside the house, Brian was still weak, and Kelsey was still dangerous in the polite way dangerous people often are. But the envelope on the workbench had weight. My notebook had weight. My mother's letter had weight. For the first time since Harold sent me out there, I understood that I was not gathering memories anymore. I was gathering leverage. And by 10:30 the next morning, someone outside this family was going to hear the truth. The next morning, I dressed for Samuel Reed's office the way I used to dress for parent-teacher conferences, carefully enough to remind myself I still belonged in rooms where decisions were made. I did not have many choices with me in the garage, so I wore the same navy slacks from Sunday dinner, a clean white blouse Eleanor had helped me retrieve from the laundry room, and my gray wool coat. I pinned my silver hair back with the pearl clip my mother had given me, then placed the manila envelope inside my largest purse. Before leaving, I stood at the garage door and listened. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of Harold moving around upstairs. For 42 years, I had measured my mornings by that sound. His footsteps. His shower. His coffee cup hitting the counter. That morning, I measured something else, how little fear I felt walking away without asking permission. Eleanor picked me up at 9:45. She had brought a thermos of coffee and a small paper bag with a blueberry muffin inside. "Eat," she said, as if we were on our way to court instead of a lawyer's office. I took the muffin, though my stomach felt too tight for food. The drive into downtown Columbus was gray and quiet. Bare trees lined the streets, their branches thin against the winter sky. Cars moved through morning traffic with headlights on, and people crossed at intersections wrapped in coats, carrying briefcases, coffee cups, ordinary lives. I watched them through the passenger window and wondered how many women were doing exactly what I had done for years, smiling in houses where they were slowly being erased. Samuel Reed's office was on the 5th floor of an older brick building near the courthouse, the kind with polished brass elevator doors and framed black and white photographs of Columbus from decades ago. The receptionist recognized my name after checking the appointment book and gave me a look I could not quite read. Not pity. Not curiosity. Professional kindness, maybe. I was grateful for the restraint. Samuel came out himself a few minutes later. He was older than I remembered, his hair mostly white now, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were the same, steady, observant, impossible to rush. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, taking my hand with both of his. "It has been a long time." "Yes," I said. "I wish I were here under better circumstances." His expression did not change much, but something sharpened behind his eyes. "Most people do." His office smelled of paper, leather, and coffee. Diplomas hung on one wall, and a small American flag stood near the window. Eleanor sat beside me, silent but solid. I placed the manila envelope on Samuel's desk. For a second, I rested my hand on it before letting go. It felt like placing my life in front of a stranger, except Samuel was not entirely a stranger. He had been there when my mother tried to protect me from a future I had been too trusting to imagine. Samuel opened the envelope and began reading. I told him everything in the plainest words I could manage. The dinner. The garage. Kelsey's talk of cooperation and transition. The conversation I overheard about a facility, a transfer, and making me sign willingly. Brian's visit. Harold's papers waiting somewhere inside the house. Samuel did not interrupt often. When he did, his questions were precise. "Did Harold say you were required to sleep outside the main living area? Did anyone prevent you from accessing your personal belongings? Have you signed any recent financial documents? Do you have joint accounts? Has your husband ever transferred property without your knowledge?" Each question made the room feel more real. Less like a family shame. More like a record. When he reached my mother's letter, he paused. His face softened just enough that I had to look away. Then he reviewed the cashier's check, the bank statements, and the old house documents. He pulled a file from a cabinet behind his desk, one with my maiden name written on a tab that had yellowed with age. "I kept copies," he said. "Your mother insisted on thorough records." Eleanor gave me a look that said she had liked my mother without ever meeting her. Samuel laid several pages side by side. "Mrs. Whitaker, I cannot promise outcomes without a full review, but I can tell you this immediately. Your husband does not have the right to force you out of your home by intimidation or pressure. He does not have the right to make unilateral decisions about property that involves your legal interest. And he certainly should not be asking you to sign anything under these circumstances." The words should have comforted me. Instead, they made my throat ache. Not because I was sad, but because I realized how long I had lived as if permission from Harold mattered more than protection from the law. Samuel tapped the old inheritance statement. "This is important. If separate inherited funds were used for the down payment, and if those funds can be traced, that may matter significantly. The business records may also matter, depending on how the company was structured and what happened over the years. We will need more documentation, but you have enough here to stop anyone from pretending you have no standing. No standing. That phrase stayed with me. Harold had tried to make me feel like I had no standing in my bedroom, no standing at my table, no standing in my own marriage. But paper remembered what pride denied. Samuel turned to a fresh legal pad. Here is what we do first. You will not sign any document they present to you. You will not discuss property division with them alone. I will send a formal letter today advising your husband that you are represented by counsel regarding marital property, residence access, and any attempted transfer or pressure involving your assets. If they have documents, those documents come to me. Will that make Harold angry? I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Samuel looked at me, not unkindly. Possibly. But anger is not authority. Eleanor murmured, put that on a pillow. For the first time in 2 days, a real smile touched my face. Small, but mine. Samuel continued. You should also keep a written log. Dates, times, exact statements, witnesses. Save messages. Photograph documents. Keep originals somewhere safe. Do you have somewhere you can stay if the house becomes unbearable? I thought of the garage, the workbench, the blanket Kelsey had placed on a chair. Then I thought of my mother's sentence. I have somewhere I can go, I said. Eleanor looked at me, ready to argue if I meant sleeping in that garage again, but I added, not forever. Just long enough to finish this properly. Samuel nodded. He prepared a short authorization form for me to sign so he could request records and communicate on my behalf. I read every line. Slowly. No one rushed me. No one sighed. No one told me I was being difficult. When I signed my name, my hand did not tremble. Margaret and Whitaker. The name looked different on that page. Not like a wife asking to be treated kindly. Like a woman documenting her return to herself. As we left the office, Samuel walked us to the door. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, your husband may have forgotten what you signed years ago. The law did not. Outside, the wind moved sharply between the buildings. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter and handed me the thermos. Coffee, she said. You look like someone who just found her spine and needs caffeine to support it. I took a sip. It was warm and strong. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. 3 times. Harold. Then Brian. Then a message from Kelsey, we need to have dinner tonight and clear all this up as a family. I stared at the words until they blurred into something almost funny. Family. They had used that word when they wanted my labor, my forgiveness, my silence, and now my signature. I placed the phone face down in my lap. Eleanor glanced over. Are you answering? No, I said. Not yet. For 42 years, I had answered too quickly. Dinner bells, phone calls, moods, needs, accusations. That day, with Samuel Reed's card in my purse and my mother's proof beside it, I decided they could wait. By the time we turned onto my street, the house looked exactly the same from the outside. White siding. Black shutters. 2 bare maple trees in the front yard. A wreath still hanging on the door from last month because I had not had the heart to take it down. But I was not the same woman who had left that morning. Harold thought tonight would be another family dinner. Kelsey thought she could polish pressure until it looked like concern. Brian thought silence would keep him safe. They did not know Samuel Reed had already begun writing the letter that would change the temperature of every room in that house. When Eleanor pulled into the driveway, I noticed the living room curtains move. Someone had been watching for me. That small detail told me more than any greeting could have. Harold did not come outside. Brian's SUV was parked along the curb, which meant he and Kelsey had returned before us, or maybe they had never really left. I thanked Eleanor, gathered my purse and the envelope Samuel had organized for me, and stepped out into the cold afternoon with a steadiness that felt unfamiliar but welcome. Eleanor lowered her window. "Call me before you go inside if you want me there." I looked at the house. The porch light was on even though it was barely 4 o'clock, and the wreath on the door tilted slightly in the wind. For years, that sight had meant home. Now it looked like a set waiting for the next scene in someone else's plan. "Not yet," I said. "They need to see me walkin' alone." Eleanor studied my face, then nodded. "Then keep your phone in your pocket and your lawyer's card where your courage can find it." I almost smiled. "That is very specific advice." "Specific advice saves lives and bank accounts," she said, and drove away. I entered through the garage because my coat and a few things were still there, not because I accepted the place Harold had assigned me. The blue metal box was back under the tarp, but its contents were no longer trapped in that cold room. Copies were with Samuel. Photos were on my phone. Notes were in my notebook. The truth had left the garage before I did. I took one slow breath, opened the kitchen door, and stepped inside. The house smelled like reheated pot roast and lemon cleaner. Kelsey was at the counter arranging a salad no one had asked for, her face bright with that careful kindness she wore when preparing to corner someone. Brian stood near the sink with his arms crossed. Harold sat at the kitchen table, fully dressed in a button-down shirt, as if formality could make him reasonable. A dark folder lay in front of him. I saw it immediately. So did everyone else when my eyes landed on it. "Margaret," Harold said. Not Marge, not Honey, not even the tired little dear he used when strangers were listening. Margaret. Like I was a tenant late on rent. "We need to talk." I set my purse on the counter but kept my hand resting on the strap. "So Kelsey said." Kelsey gave a small laugh, too airy to be real. "I only meant that last night got out of hand." "Everyone said things from a place of stress." "Everyone?" I asked. She looked at Harold, then Brian. "We all have feelings." I took off my coat and hung it on the chair instead of the hook by the back door. It was a small thing, but Kelsey noticed. "I have had a long morning," I said. "If there is something to say it plainly." Harold opened the folder. "Fine. Plainly. This arrangement cannot continue." "Which arrangement?" "You living here as if nothing needs to change." I looked around the kitchen I had painted twice, the cabinets I had scrubbed for decades, the window where I had grown basil every summer until Harold complained about dirt on the sill. Interesting. Harold's jaw tightened. Brian shifted his weight. Kelsey stepped in, soft as a hand over a doorknob. "Margaret, this is not about punishing you. It is about planning. You are getting older. Harold is getting older. The house is too much for both of you, and frankly, the tension is unhealthy. Brian and I have found a senior living community in Dublin. It is very nice. There are activities, transportation, even a little library." She said library like she was offering me dignity by the teaspoon. Harold slid a paper across the table. "This gives Brian authority to help manage certain matters while we transition." I did not touch it. "Certain matters?" "Financial matters," Brian said quietly. His voice looked for gentleness and found weakness instead. "Just to make things easier, Mom." I looked at him. "For whom?" No one answered. Kelsey picked up a pen and placed it beside the paper. "You do not have to make this dramatic." There it was again, that old trick. Name a woman dramatic before she can name the truth. I pulled out the chair across from Harold and sat down. Not because they invited me. Because it was my table. "Read it to me," I said. Harold frowned. "What?" If you want me to sign something, read it out loud. Kelsey's smile thinned. Margaret, that is not necessary. Then neither is my signature. Brian looked down. Harold snatched up the paper with irritation he tried to disguise as impatience. He began reading portions of it, skipping quickly over phrases until I stopped him. Slower. He glared at me. I looked back calmly. He continued. The document gave Brian broad authority over bank accounts, household decisions, medical coordination, and property discussions. It described my relocation as voluntary. It described my current living arrangement as unsuitable, as if the garage had chosen me instead of Harold. It referred to family consensus. That almost made me laugh. Family consensus was what people called betrayal when everyone but the victim had voted. When Harold finished, the kitchen was silent except for the refrigerator humming. No, I said. Kelsey blinked. No? No. Harold leaned forward. Margaret, do not start. I am not starting anything. I am declining to sign. Brian's face tightened with worry. Mom, we are trying to avoid legal complications. I opened my purse and took out Samuel Reed's business card. I placed it on the table, gently, facing Harold. It looked small on the wood, but the effect was immediate. Kelsey stopped breathing for half a second. Harold stared at the card. Brian read the name and went pale around the mouth. What is this? Harold asked. My attorney. Kelsey recovered first. You hired an attorney against your own family? I looked at her. No, Kelsey. I hired an attorney because my own family handed me papers after putting me in the garage. The sentence landed cleanly. No shouting. No trembling. Just a fact placed where everyone could see it. Harold pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous. Perhaps, I said. Then Samuel can confirm that when he reviews your documents. Harold's eyes narrowed. You had no right to take private family matters outside this house. For the first time, I saw the full shape of his fear. It wore anger like a coat, but it was fear underneath. Fear of records. Fear of questions. Fear that the story he had told about himself might have receipts missing from it. You made it a legal matter when you tried to make me sign away control, I said. You made it a dignity matter when you sent me out of my bedroom. You made it a family matter when our son sat here and let it happen. Brian flinched, but I did not soften the words. Some truths should not be cushioned. Kelsey folded her arms. This is exactly what I was worried about. You are confused and emotional. I reached into my purse again, pulled out my notebook, and opened to the page where I had written her words from that morning. Yesterday at approximately 6:50 in the morning, you said, if you cooperate, this can stay peaceful. Later, from the breakfast nook, you discussed a facility, a transfer, and making me sign willingly. Kelsey's face changed. Not much. Just enough. The polish cracked at the corner. Brian looked at her. Harold looked at the notebook. I closed it. I am not confused. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the doorbell rang. The sound moved through the house with almost comic politeness. Kelsey turned sharply toward the hall. Harold stood. Brian remained frozen. I did not move. Harold opened the front door, and a moment later Samuel Reed's voice carried into the kitchen, calm and professional. Good afternoon, Mr. Whitaker. I am here to deliver correspondence regarding Mrs. Whitaker's legal representation and residence rights. Kelsey whispered something under her breath. Brian sat down slowly. I kept my hands folded on the table. I had not known Samuel would come in person. Eleanor must have given him enough concern to move quickly, or perhaps my mother was still protecting me through every copy she had insisted he keep. Harold returned with Samuel behind him. Samuel held a sealed envelope and nodded to me first. Not to Harold. To me. That small courtesy nearly undid me. Mrs. Whittaker, he said. I apologize for the interruption, but given the circumstances, I felt personal delivery was appropriate. Harold's face had gone red, but his voice came out controlled. This is unnecessary. Samuel looked at the folder on the table, the pen beside it, and the business card with his name facing up. On the contrary, he said, it appears to be timely. Kelsey's eyes moved from Samuel to me, and for the first time since she married my son, I saw her calculate without confidence. The table had changed. The room had changed. I had changed. They had invited me to dinner expecting a signature. Instead, they received a witness. Samuel did not raise his voice. That was what made the room shrink around Harold. Men like my husband understood shouting. They understood slammed doors, wounded pride, and conversations where the loudest person decided what the truth was. Samuel Reed brought none of that into my kitchen. He simply placed the sealed envelope on the table beside Harold's folder and said, "This letter confirms that Mrs. Whittaker is represented by my office regarding marital property, residence access, financial authority, and any proposed transfer of assets connected to this home or Whittaker construction." Harold stared at the envelope as if it had insulted him. "You came to my house to tell me how to speak to my wife?" Samuel's expression remained mild. "I came to advise you that Mrs. Whittaker should not be pressured to sign documents without independent review. I also came to make clear that any attempt to remove her from the marital residence, restrict access to her belongings, or obtain signatures under distress may create serious legal complications." Kelsey shifted near the counter. "No one is pressuring anyone," she said, too quickly. Samuel turned toward her. "And you are?" For one beautiful second, Kelsey looked offended that a room might exist where her importance had to be explained. "I am Kelsey Whittaker, Brian's wife." "Then unless you are Mrs. Whittaker's attorney, financial advisor, or appointed representative, I would recommend you avoid directing discussions about her property rights." The silence after that sentence was so complete I heard the ice maker drop cubes into the freezer bin. Kelsey's face did not fall apart. Women like Kelsey rarely fall apart in public. Instead, she became still, like a person adjusting the mask from behind. Brian rubbed both hands over his face. Harold picked up the envelope, but he did not open it. "This is family business." Samuel looked at me, then back to Harold. Family business often becomes legal business when one party is asked to surrender rights at a kitchen table. I watched Harold absorb that. Not accept it. Harold rarely accepted anything that did not flatter him. But he heard it. And that was enough for the moment. Samuel opened his briefcase and took out a copy of the letter. For clarity, Mrs. Whittaker has provided documents showing that inherited funds may have contributed substantially to the acquisition of this residence. There are also preliminary records suggesting her separate funds may have supported the early operations of Whittaker Construction. We will be requesting full records. Harold's jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle move beneath his cheek. That money was given freely. She was my wife. The sentence should not have surprised me, yet it did. She was my wife. Not partner. Not equal. Not the woman who made the risk possible. Just wife, as if the word meant automatic surrender. Samuel nodded once. That may be your position. Documentation will determine what can be supported. Brian looked from his father to me. Mom, is this true? You put money into the company? I held his gaze. Your grandmother's money helped start the company your father told everyone he built alone. Brian's mouth opened slightly. He looked like a man watching the floor plan of his childhood change under his feet. Why did you never say anything? I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. Because when I was young, I thought love did not keep score. When I got older, I realized some people were keeping score the whole time and using my silence as a discount. Kelsey stepped forward. This is getting unnecessarily hostile. We were trying to help you. I turned to her fully. You suggested a facility before asking what I wanted. You brought me a blanket instead of telling my husband he was wrong. You prepared papers that described my leaving as voluntary before I had agreed to leave. Her lips parted, but nothing came out quickly enough. That was new. Samuel gathered the unsigned papers Harold had placed on the table, but he did not take them. He simply angled them toward me. Mrs. Whitaker, did anyone explain these documents to you before asking you to sign? No. Did you request that Brian take control over your finances? No. Did you agree to relocate to any senior living community? No. Each answer was small. Each answer landed like a nail tapped cleanly into place. Harold's face had changed from anger to something tighter, more contained. You are making me look like a monster. For the first time all evening, I felt something close to sadness for him. Not pity. Not forgiveness. Just the sorrow of seeing a person choose self-protection over truth so many times that he cannot recognize himself without admiration. Harold, I said, you did that when you told your wife to sleep in the garage. Brian flinched again. Good. Some memories should not be allowed to soften. Samuel placed a hand lightly on the back of the chair beside me. Mrs. Whitaker, given the circumstances, I advise that you gather essential personal items tonight if you wish to stay elsewhere temporarily. That is your choice. Not an admission. Not abandonment. Simply personal safety and comfort while matters are reviewed. Kelsey seized on the word. So she is leaving. Samuel looked at her. Temporarily staying elsewhere is not the same as relinquishing residence rights. I suggest everyone in this room learn that distinction. I saw Kelsey's throat move as she swallowed. Harold finally opened the envelope. His eyes moved over the page, then stopped. You are requesting bank records? Relevant financial records, yes. Business records? Relevant ones. Property documents? All applicable documents. Harold folded the paper with hands that were not quite steady. That was when I knew. He was not just angry about being challenged. He was afraid of what the papers would remember. For decades, Harold's story had been simple. He worked hard, built a company, bought a house, carried a family. My story had been folded into his like a receipt tucked inside a Bible. Useful once, then forgotten. But forgotten is not the same as gone. Brian sat down heavily at the table. Dad? Harold did not answer. Kelsey moved behind Brian and touched his shoulder, but he pulled away just enough for me to notice. She noticed too. Her eyes flashed, then softened again. Brian, do not let this become something ugly. I looked at my son. It became ugly when truth sounded worse to you than what happened to me. He looked down, and this time I did not search for the little boy. I let him be the man in front of me. Samuel closed his briefcase. I will expect all further communication about documents to go through my office. Mrs. Whitaker, I will wait in the living room if you would like to collect anything before I leave. It was a small protection, offered without drama. I stood. The chair legs scraped gently against the floor. No one tried to stop me. That absence of resistance told me more than resistance would have. Power had shifted, quietly but completely. I walked upstairs to the bedroom Harold had tried to exile me from. My side of the closet was still there. My shoes lined neatly on the rack. My robe hung from the hook behind the door. The bed was made, the quilt smooth, the pillows arranged. Just as I had left them Sunday morning before I knew my life would split open over dinner. I took a small suitcase from the closet and packed 3 changes of clothes, my medications, my mother's pearl clip, a framed photograph of Brian at age 7, and the small jewelry box Harold never noticed because nothing in it looked expensive enough to matter. When I came back downstairs, Kelsey stood in the hallway. Margaret, she said softly, you are going to regret turning this into a war. I paused with my hand on the suitcase handle. No, Kelsey. I regret calling surrender peace. Her eyes hardened. Just for a second, I saw the woman beneath the careful voice. Then I walked past her. Samuel stood by the front door, not in a hurry. Harold remained in the kitchen. Brian did not follow me. I opened the front door myself. Cold air entered the house, clean and sharp. For 2 nights, Harold had wanted me to leave through the garage. That evening, with my attorney beside me and my suitcase in my hand, I walked out through the front door. Samuel drove me to Eleanor's townhouse that evening because Eleanor insisted from the passenger seat of her own car that no woman should have to ride alone after walking out of a house that had forgotten her worth. I sat in the back with my suitcase beside me, watching the streets of Columbus pass under the yellow wash of winter streetlights. The city looked ordinary, almost indifferent. A pharmacy window glowed on the corner. A man in a red coat walked his dog past a closed bakery. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner, asking for salt, talking about work, pretending tomorrow would look like today. I wondered how many endings happen quietly in neighborhoods where the porch lights still come on. Eleanor made up the guest room with fresh sheets and a quilt her sister had sewn years ago. There was a small lamp on the nightstand, a glass of water, and a framed print of Lake Erie in pale blue and gray. I slept more deeply that night than I expected. Not peacefully, exactly. Peace takes time. But I slept without listening for Harold's footsteps, without wondering what mood would decide the temperature of breakfast, without shrinking myself to make the walls feel less tense. The next weeks unfolded slowly, not like revenge in a movie, but like truth doing paperwork. Samuel requested records. Harold delayed, then complained, then produced less than required, which only made Samuel more patient and more precise. Bank statements surfaced. Old checks matched my inheritance account. Property documents confirmed what my mother had tried to preserve. Early business records showed the money that helped launch Whitaker Construction. Each page did not erase the humiliation, but it corrected the lie. Harold had not built everything alone. Brian had not inherited a simple story. Kelsey had not discovered a helpless old woman sitting in a garage. She had discovered the wrong woman on the right night. Harold called me after the first formal response from Samuel's office. I let it go to voicemail. His message was stiff at first, full of words like misunderstanding and overreaction. By the 3rd call, he sounded tired. By the 5th, he said, Margaret, we should talk like adults. I listened to that one twice, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to hear how small authority sounded when it lost its audience. Brian texted me more than he called. At first, he wrote that he was confused. Then he wrote that Kelsey had only been trying to help. Then, after Samuel's office requested documents related to the proposed power of attorney, Brian sent a different message, Mom, I did not understand what they were asking you to sign. I wanted to believe him. A mother's heart is a stubborn thing. It will search for innocence in a grown son even when the facts are sitting on the table with dates and signatures. But wanting to believe is not the same as returning to blindness. I answered him only once. I wrote, you were in the room. That was all. Kelsey disappeared from social media for almost a month. No polished family photos. No quotes about kindness. No pictures of coffee beside open planners. I heard from Eleanor's neighbor, who knew someone from Kelsey's church circle, that she was telling people I had become difficult after a late-life emotional episode. That almost amused me. Women like Kelsey depend on vague phrases. They say difficult when they mean disobedient. They say emotional when they mean informed. They say family peace when they mean silence from the person they harmed. Samuel advised me not to engage, so I did not. I had spent enough years explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. The legal process took months, not days. That is the part stories often skip. There were meetings, documents, appraisals, account reviews, and long afternoons when the old grief rose without warning. I grieved the husband Harold had once been, or maybe the husband I had invented because I needed my sacrifices to mean something. I grieved the son Brian had been before he learned to hide behind other people's plans. I even grieved the house, not because I wanted to return to it, but because every room held a version of me who had tried so hard to be loved correctly. In the end, the settlement gave me enough to step away with dignity. My legal interest in the house was recognized. My financial contribution to the early business could not be dismissed as some sentimental favor. Harold kept more than he deserved emotionally, but less than he expected legally. That was enough. I did not need to ruin him. I needed to stop being erased by him. 3 months after the night in the garage, I bought a small townhouse in Upper Arlington with white trim, a narrow front porch, and just enough garden space for lavender, hydrangeas, and tomatoes in the summer. Eleanor helped me choose a cream reading chair for the living room. Samuel sent a housewarming card that simply said, "May this home know your name." I placed my mother's blue metal box on a shelf in my bedroom, not hidden this time, not buried under tarps or old tools. On my first morning there, I made coffee, opened the blinds, and watched sunlight move across the hardwood floor. No one told me I was in the way. No one measured my usefulness. No one asked me to cooperate with my own disappearance. Brian came by once in early spring. He stood on my porch holding grocery store flowers and looking older than 41. I did not invite him in right away. We stood there between the door and the world, both of us knowing something had broken that apologies could not instantly repair. "Mom," he said, "I should have spoken up." I looked at him for a long time. "Yes," I said. His eyes filled, but he did not look away this time. That mattered. Not enough to fix everything. Enough to begin telling the truth. I took the flowers and told him we could have coffee on the porch for 20 minutes. Boundaries, I had learned, are not cruelty. They are doors with locks that finally work. Harold wrote me one letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, his handwriting stiff and uneven. He said the house felt empty. He said he had been angry and proud. He said he never thought I would actually leave. That was the truest line in the whole letter. He never thought I would leave because for 42 years, I had trained him to believe I would stay through anything. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, unanswered. Some apologies arrive too late to be keys. They are only receipts. As for Kelsey, I heard she and Brian began having problems after the paperwork exposed how much she had pushed for control she had no right to claim. I did not celebrate that. I had no interest in watching another marriage bend under the weight of selfishness. I only hoped Brian would finally learn that peace bought with someone else's dignity always comes due. Sometimes, when the evenings are cold, I think about that garage. The concrete floor. The bare bulb. The smell of dust and motor oil. I think about the woman I was when I first stepped inside, carrying a coat around my shoulders and 42 years of swallowed words in my chest. I want to reach back and tell her she was not being buried there. She was being returned to the evidence. Harold thought he was sending me beneath him. Kelsey thought she was moving me out of the way. Brian thought his silence would keep him safe. None of them understood that a woman does not become powerless because someone closes a door behind her. Sometimes the wrong door opens onto the only truth left in the house. The night I slept in the garage, I did not lose my home. I found out who had been living in it with me. And when I finally walked away, I did not leave as a wife being punished. I left as the owner of my own name.